I've always heard the phrase, nobody is perfect. If that's true, then I'm normal. I mean, I'm not perfect. My biggest flaw, which I've learned to control, is quite serious. I love starting fires. When I was younger, it was a real problem, and that's how I got my nickname, Pyro Pity. My name isn't Pete or Peter, it's Robert Smith. It's one of the most common names in America, which can be both a blessing and a curse. But let's get back to my nickname. My brother William gave it to me when I was 12. The name stuck with me for a long time, but when I learned to better manage my impulses, the role of Pyro faded, though people kept calling me Pity. Sometimes it was awkward to explain that my actual name was Robert. My second issue is that I have an unusual reaction to beer. If I drink more than 1 pint, I fall asleep. If I manage to drink 2 or more, I completely pass out for 10 to 12 hours. It was much easier to come to terms with the beer problem than with my pyromania. I didn't quit drinking entirely, but I figured out when, where, and how much I could handle. When I was 14, I spent the summer experimenting with my fire starting skills. Several garages and sheds in the neighborhood became the victims of my experiments. Of course, I quickly realized that this wasn't something to share with friends or family. Unfortunately, I was young and careless. I got caught pretty fast, and I went through the legal and psychological procedures. However, I never lost my interest in fire setting. I spent a lot of time researching and experimenting, but always in a way that avoided any risk of exposure or embarrassment. Besides the usual problems, growing up wasn't easy. My older brother William was always the favorite and the golden boy. I had to work hard just to keep my head above water, while he became a genius in academics, a sports hero, and a ladies' man. Being his younger brother didn't do my self-esteem any favors. The happiest day of my life was when he went off to college, on a full scholarship, of course. No matter how unskilled I was, I still managed to finish high school and get a job as a roofer. In fact, I actually liked my job. I think I had something like attention deficit disorder because it was hard for me to stick with any job for more than a few days. My choice of profession helped me avoid that problem to some extent. I was always starting a new project and finishing it before I lost interest. It was a pretty fortunate coincidence. Time passed, and I was able to keep my condition under control. 10 years after graduating high school, I finally met a girl and started a relationship. Another year passed before I was ready to ask the big question. From a girl's perspective, Sarah was nearly perfect. I wasn't particularly picky, but I really couldn't find any flaws in her. She had beautiful chestnut hair, a lovely complexion, and an attractive figure. Once we saved enough money, we bought a small house to start a family. Everything was great until my brother William decided to visit us. William had graduated from college and got a job as an electrical engineer. He worked for one of the big chemical companies in North Carolina. I hadn't seen him in almost 10 years, and I wasn't exactly excited to see him now. We all gathered at my parents' place for a family reunion. William had just returned from the Poconos, where he bought a cabin on 5 acres of wooded land. From the pictures, it looked more like a hunting lodge. On Labor Day weekend, he was planning an open house and gave us detailed directions on how to get there. William's wife, Rachel, was in North Carolina with their 2 kids. He was eager for us to meet her and the children at the cabin later that summer. Things were going better than I expected until I noticed that Sarah and William were getting a little too friendly. I expected my wife to be friendly, but her interactions with William were unusual. She was flirting, and he encouraged her. Suddenly, I remembered all the reasons I hated my brother. He was leaving the next day, and I didn't want to cause a scene. I forced myself to spend more time with my father than I wanted, just to avoid seeing Sarah and William together. It was almost time for us to head home when Sarah dropped an unexpected bombshell. She invited William to stay the night in our guest room. I was ready to explode right then and there. Things got worse when she told me she was going to ride back home with William in his car because she had never ridden in a Mercedes. I knew it was a lie, but by that point, it didn't seem to matter. I tried my hardest not to show my anger. I never expected this from Sarah, but she had never met William before. He was charming and could talk anyone into anything. Sarah spent way too much time showing him around the house and explaining how she planned to decorate each room. We finally sat down to relax when Sarah brought out a couple of beers. Normally, I only drink 2 or 3 beers a month, and only when I'm planning to stay home and go straight to bed. William glanced over and smiled as he started drinking. Sarah had a glass of wine in her hand. "Hey, we've got a jar of those special nuts in the pantry. Hang on a second, I'll get them." The nice thing about Heinz is that you can't tell what's in the green bottle. I poured the beer down the sink. I returned with a jar of nuts and a bottle of tap water. Up until that point, I was still trying to give Sarah the benefit of the doubt. We chatted for about 20 minutes, and she came back with 2 more bottles of Heinz. Now I knew William and Sarah were up to something. They both knew about my problem with beer, and it seemed like they were using it to their advantage. I don't know what William did or said to Sarah, or when he did it. Maybe they planned everything during their short drive back home. In the end, it didn't really matter. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. The beer poured into the toilet along with my urine, and I returned with another full bottle of water. I noticed a smirk on William's face as I took a big gulp. It drove me mad, but when I saw Sarah smile, I was filled with rage. Normally, after 2 beers, I would be out cold. It was easy to pretend to be sleepy, and I even acted like I was struggling to stay awake. I finished the second bottle of water and slowly walked to the kitchen. I put on a show, throwing away the empty bottle and opening the fridge to grab a fresh one. When I came back with the third bottle, William was grinning from ear to ear, and Sarah blushed. I quickly drank the last bottle of water, closed my eyes, and started breathing heavily, as if I had fallen asleep. My wife and my brother whispered quietly, turned off the living room lights, and headed down the hall to the bedroom. They both thought I was out for the night, completely oblivious. I waited about 20 minutes, then walked to the bedroom. The door opened without a problem. Moonlight streaming through the window made it easy to see my brother and my wife together in our bed. They had no idea I was standing there, watching them. The night was far from over, and I had a 3-hour drive ahead of me. I have to admit, William drew a good map. I had no trouble finding his cabin in the woods. It was a beautiful place, and it must have cost him more than $250,000. 30 minutes later, I was already driving home, and in the rearview mirror, the cabin was a large, glowing orange ball. I parked down the street from my house, out of sight, just as the sun began to rise. Suddenly, Sarah appeared in the doorway. She looked around and, seeing my truck was gone, quickly went back inside. 10 minutes later, William rushed out of the house, jumped into his precious Mercedes, and sped off down the street. It was still early, so I headed to a cafe for breakfast. Sarah left for work at 8. By 8:10, our precious house and all our savings had gone up in smoke. I lingered by my truck just long enough to make sure everything worked as planned, then drove downtown to close our accounts. I only managed to gather a couple of $1,000s. We weren't wealthy, and all our money had gone into buying the house. When I returned home, the police and fire trucks were still everywhere. Sarah was there, talking to the police. I walked over to her Ford Focus and slipped one of my special packages under the passenger seat. It was a mix of gasoline and styrofoam with a small igniter made from a remote-controlled car. I'm not sure, but I think Sarah saw me leaving just as her precious little car went up in flames. My work here was done. It was time to move on. I had never been to North Carolina before. It was beautiful, but I wouldn't want to live there. It took me 2 days to find where William lived. His house was way better than the cabin. It must have been about 6,000 square feet, with a 3-car garage. I had to park several blocks away to keep an eye on the place. My old truck would have raised suspicions in that neighborhood. I never saw William, but his wife Rachel came out with their 2 kids to catch the school bus. A little while later, she backed out of the garage in a Subaru Outback. There was a sticker on the front advertising a local real estate company. I had no trouble getting into the house. You'd think they'd have a security system, but they didn't. No one would dare rob William. He wasn't home, but his Mercedes was sitting in the garage alongside a nice little Harley-Davidson. Well, actually, it was a big Harley. I quickly went through the house to make sure it was empty, and I found out it wasn't. There was a litter box in the laundry room, but no cat. I spent a few minutes looking around, then decided to use a can opener. 10 seconds later, Tabby appeared, looking for food. A few minutes after that, he was comfortably settled in the cat carrier I found in the garage. Finding Old North realtors wasn't difficult. I only had to ask for directions once. I walked through the front door and asked for Rachel Smith. Soon she came out, and I handed her the cat carrier. She looked at the cat, then at me, just for a moment. "Oh no, pity, tell me you didn't do it. Please, say you didn't." We had never met, but she immediately knew who I was. "I'm sorry. It had to be done. I didn't want to harm your cat." "Why, pity? Why? What good comes from burning your own brother's house to the ground?" "You'll have to ask him. I'll call you in a week. If he doesn't tell you by then, I will." We were interrupted by a frantic man running through the door. "Call the fire department. There's a car on fire in the parking lot. Hurry." Rachel looked at me, but I just shrugged and turned away. As I walked out, I heard the secretary in the office telling my sister-in-law that the fire department was already at her house. By that point, I had satisfied my anger. I was still mad, but I no longer felt the urge to burn anything else. I drove west for a while, then headed south. I spent a few days in northern Alabama. There was a lot of roofing work, which, as I found out, was caused by several strong hailstorms in the area. The big issue was that all the roofers seemed to be Mexican. They worked in teams, and the quality of their work was excellent. My hopes of finding any work seemed slim until I noticed a job listing in the local paper for insurance inspectors specializing in roofing work. I did my best to clean myself up, considering the few belongings I had with me. Apparently, it was enough, because I got the job immediately. They even paid to send me to 2 weeks of training in mobile, and afterward, I became a certified insurance agent with one of the big companies. They had so many claims that I'd have worked for at least 6 months. I had no problem using my own name and social security number. I'm sure several law enforcement agencies were looking for me, but not in Alabama. I bought a small apartment and then sold my old truck. The insurance agency provided me with a car, along with extra money for gas and maintenance. I did my job, and I did it well. Everyone was satisfied. I didn't meddle in other people's business and stayed out of trouble. Shortly after settling in, I called my brother's wife. She said that William claimed he had no idea what could have driven me to set the fire. I had promised to tell her what really happened if William refused, but I decided to change my mind. I told her that since he refused to be honest with her, I'd have to come back later. When I hung up, there was a note of concern in her voice. My new job required me to take better care of my appearance. I had to get regular haircuts and shave every day. These were grooming habits I knew about, but never really bothered with. Maybe that's why it took me so long to find a wife or have a steady girlfriend. I usually ate dinner at a fast food place, and sometimes at a sit-down restaurant. Lunch was always something quick. Since I was the worst drunk in the world, I avoided socializing at bars. About once a month, I would call home. My parents expressed their disappointment with what I had done. I never gave any explanations or excuses. Finally, about 6 months later, Sarah told them the truth. Due to my and William's childhood relationship, they understood the situation. William suddenly lost their favor. My father confronted him directly, but he denied everything. Fortunately for me, they believed Sarah. Sarah tried to figure out where I was and what I intended to do about our marriage. She had been living with her sister ever since the house burned down. That was the last time they mentioned her. In the conversations I had with my parents afterward, neither my brother nor my wife were ever brought up. My parents knew that I could only keep talking to them if they avoided those two topics. I continued doing my job well. Many local churches offered free English as a second language, ESL, classes. Before long, I started attending those classes and learning Spanish. During that time, I made several friends. Some of them were roofers I had interacted with while working. There were also a few bricklayers, carpenters, and concrete workers. They worked hard during the day but never missed their evening English classes. They often joked about their kids, who attended public schools and spoke perfect, accent-free English. Many of their wives joined them in the classes as well. Soon my employer assumed I was bilingual. I never really learned to speak Spanish fluently, but I had no trouble holding a conversation with the workers. My arson crime was never investigated. I'm sure there were police reports, and my name was listed in all of them, but no one ever came looking for me. I used my own social security number on all my employment documents and even filed the appropriate federal income tax returns. Nothing happened. I had been gone for about 2 years when my dad had a stroke. By the time I found out, he was home, but he required a lot of care. My mom asked if I could come home to visit him. I couldn't refuse. I took 2 weeks off from work and bought a used Focus, the same kind of car Sarah used to drive. It was cheap and had good gas mileage. I packed the trunk with some of my gear and hit the road. I rented a motel about 50 kilometers from home, just in case someone was still looking for me. I spent the first day catching up with my parents. William and Rachel had built a new house, even bigger and grander than the old one. Dad winked when Mom gave me their new address, just in case I wanted to send them a Christmas card. I think I had an ally. Sarah had stopped calling or visiting them. They hadn't heard from the police or insurance companies in over a year. They wanted me to stay at the house, but I insisted on going back to the motel. When I was leaving, it was already late, but I decided to stop by Sarah's sister's place. I sat outside the house when a very large pickup truck pulled up. The couple in the vehicle shared a few kisses before my wife got out and headed toward the house. The guy waited until she was at the door, which I thought was considerate. She turned to him, smiled, and waved before going inside. I was glad I had brought some items with me. A few kilometers away was a late-night diner, and it seemed that my wife's new friend needed to refuel. He parked in the middle of the lot to avoid anyone bumping his fancy truck. I parked on the side and went up to the Dodge to place an order, a special order. He took a table by the window and was just finishing up his order when I approached his table. "Is that your Dodge out there?" "Yes. Why do you ask?" "I just saw you pull up. It's definitely a great vehicle. Mind if I sit?" He just nodded, and I signaled the waitress. A vehicle like that must have cost quite a bit, right? I made it as a comment, but phrased it as a question. The truck cost me $36,000, but I also spent over $10,000 on accessories. I never learned his name, but we talked about his truck for the next 20 minutes. I had just finished my coffee, and he ordered the diner's signature midnight breakfast. "I don't want to seem nosy, but aren't you the guy who's seeing Sarah Smith?" "Yes. Do you know her?" "We went to high school together. I thought she was married." This was another comment phrased as a question. "She is married, but her husband has been dead for a long time. The cops are looking for him for burning down his own house." "What an idiot. Why did he do that?" "Sarah said he caught her with his brother. He also burned down his brother's house." "Did she admit to sleeping with his brother?" "Yes. She said her husband wasn't intimate with her, so she had to look elsewhere. Now I'm going to help her." "That's harsh. Why didn't she just get a divorce?" "I don't know. You'd have to ask her. Why all the questions?" "Just curious. Aren't you worried that he might find out about you and his wife?" "Not at all. He's long gone, and if he came back, I'd knock the hell out of him." I gave him a wide smile, and a strange look appeared on his face. "Wrong answer, moron." His eyes widened as I grabbed the remote control and pressed the button. Homemade napalm instantly drenched the Dodge. Startled, he knocked over his chair and jumped up. "Say hi to my wife for me." No one saw me leave the diner because everyone was focused on the large burning pile of metal in the parking lot. I drove carefully to the motel and decided to check out. 6 hours later, I was in North Carolina, inspecting my brother's new house. I expected to see William leaving for work, the kids going to school, and Rachel heading to her office. But things didn't go as planned. Around the same time, 2 police cars and a security company van arrived. The garage door was open, and Rachel was busy loading kids and a few bags into her new Volvo. The last thing she put in was a cat carrier. Someone must have tipped off my brother that I was on the warpath. I'm not stupid. I could have done what I needed to do another time. I quietly left the area and headed west towards the interstate. Not far from Knoxville, my mobile phone rang. It was Rachel. "I know, Petey. Now I know. He didn't tell me, but I guessed." "How did you figure it out?" "She called early this morning. She called William and told him what you did to her guy, or rather, his truck. That's when everything fell into place. William slept with Sarah, didn't he, Petey? That son of a bitch slept with his own brother's wife." "I'm sorry, Rachel. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't. I hoped you could get him to confess." She wasn't the only one, Petey. There were others, and there will be more. I have to put an end to it, at least as far as I'm concerned. I didn't know what to say. It was clear that my sister-in-law wanted to talk to someone about the issue, but I was not the right person. Sorry, Petey, for what I have to do. I'll do it for you, but I'll say that you did it. Won't you be upset with me? The way she phrased it sounded like a riddle, but I understood what she meant. It's fine. I'm already so deep into this that it won't matter. Make it easier for yourself. It seems no one knows where I am anyway. Rachel, if you're going to do this, do it right. Don't rush and don't be careless. Plan ahead and make sure the cat is safe. I heard her laughter on the other end of the line just before we hung up. 2 months later, my brother lost his second big house. According to Mom and Dad, Rachel told the police she saw me at the house the day before the fire. Firefighters were frustrated because the more water they poured on the fire, the worse it got. Rachel did some research on accelerants. Good girl. A week after the fire, Rachel filed for divorce. She was quite clever, and I was sure she would settle the score with him. Sarah's boyfriend blamed her for the loss of his truck, and she ended up in the hospital while he went to jail. Of course, he knew she had nothing to do with the fire, but I was unavailable. I think I'm ready to file for divorce, but given the circumstances, I don't know how to proceed. All I can do is hope that Sarah will file for divorce. I just learned that a promotion is in store for me at work. I also found out that the company I work for is the same one where my brother had his houses insured. What a coincidence.